Welcome to Rick on Life, brought to you by the Liberty Beacon Media Project. I'm your host, Rick Amitin, and this is where we like to talk about things that are affecting our daily lives. I have a very special guest with me today and a friend, author Pat Haddock. Pat is a sixth-generation Texan, and storytelling is in her blood. She is the author of 3 published books, and her 2016 award-winning short story, Dawn of the Angry Guns, can be heard on YouTube, which we'll have a link for you directly. Pat, now retired, is juggling 3 new novels that are underway. Meantime, she participates with the Writers Guild of Texas and the Association of Texas Authors. She accepts speaking engagements and proofreads other authors' books. Pat, it's very good to see you. Thank you for being on the show today.
Glad to be with you.
I'll tell you what, I miss you. I miss seeing you. I miss our times together there when I was in Texas. And so it's really great to see you and be able to spend a little bit of time with you today. Let's jump into the fun stuff.
All right.
Tell us about chair volleyball.
Well, I live in an independent living senior community. Some of our people, actually, there's probably more artificial knees than real ones here, but we still get around. So we play volleyball from seated position. And I can promise you there's a lot of upper body stretching doing that, but it's fun. I just played a game this morning.
Are you in chairs with wheels, or are they stationary?
No, just plain old folding card table chairs.
And you have to play from that position?
You play from a seated position. Yes, you do.
Yeah, that's got to be hilarious.
It is, but you'd be surprised what long extended volleys there are.
Yeah, well, I can imagine. That's great. I think that's great. Do you have a regular group that's out there?
Right. There's about 12 of us who show up every Tuesday morning at 10.
Oh, that's so cool.
And it gets really competitive.
That's cool. Tell us about your involvement and what is it, the Red Hat Society?
Well, I started out and joined a group, probably 15 years ago. And as time has evolved, we've had 2 separate queens. They're called queens, the leaders of the groups. And as it turns out, I am now queen of a group. I am Queen Laughs a Lot.
Queen Laughs a Lot.
That's right.
And tell us a little more about the group. What do you guys do?
Well, we're called the Texas Red Hot Beauties. We love to have fun. We meet on the second Saturday of the month around the lunch period. We do have a meal together, but we love to go do fun things. It hadn't been that long since we went to Painting with a Twist and did a painting. And our group went to a place called Pickles and Pottery, and we painted pottery. We've gone to the Tulip Farm over in the mid-cities. We've gone to the Bluebonnet Festival down in Austin. Not as active as we once were because we're not as young as we once were, but we do still have fun together.
Well, knowing you have a lot of fun together in that group.
I love fun.
Yeah. Pat, when did you first discover that you wanted to be a writer?
Well, Rick, I think if you ask any other writer, they're going to say, I've written all my life. And as it turns out, that's not too far wrong for me. When my grandmother passed away, in some of her keepsake documents was a letter that I wrote when I was about 7, just learning cursive handwriting. And I remember the letter clearly, and she must have really loved it because she kept it all those years. It said, "Dear Grandmother and Granddaddy, how are you? We are fine. I have to go now. My brother is about to get a whipping and I want to watch."
Yeah.
So I've been writing all of my life. Actually, I started seriously in about 2010, 2011, something like that, when my dog started writing emails to his Aunt Peggy.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that book in a minute.
Yeah.
So since you had sort of, casually been writing, and then when you decided ultimately to, around 2010, as you mentioned, when you wanted to get serious about it, how did you begin? Did you know where to start? Where did you get connected, or how did you move forward?
Well, fortunately, again, I wanted to do this for Petey and for my sister Peggy. So that was the motivation to muddle into it. The first thing I did was go join the Writers Guild of Texas. And I sat and listened to them. And the more I listened to them, the less I thought I was a writer. I think that that's usually the first thing you think is, I can't do this. Look at all of these brilliant people who've written all these books. But I was determined to get that book out. And with their help, it came out.
Would that be your advice to someone who is feeling like they have a book inside of them, or that they want to write? Would you suggest maybe their first step then would be to find a writers group to connect with if they don't have experience or training? Or
Absolutely. If you're going to learn to ride a horse, you better find somebody who knows how.
Yeah.
Same thing with writing. Surround yourself with experienced people. Writers are kind to one another, and they encourage one another.
Yeah, I have some experience in a couple of different writers groups. I participated in the one that you're involved in there, at the Writers Guild. And I would say that not all writers groups are the same.
That could be.
I think you do have to find, like another group that I participated in, they were so heavily tilted toward fiction, which was not my passion. It was not my interest. And writing techniques can be the same, but I didn't get the same kind of interaction or help and support, because they were all kind of moving in a different direction. And so I kept looking. I found help in the group that you're in. So there are groups, you may have to reach out a little bit, that I think can fit whatever the person's interest and needs are. You might have to work at it a little bit, but I learned something from every group and the writers that I was around.
Sure.
Some of my most valuable help was just sitting with someone like you and chatting, over coffee.
Right.
And saying, this is what I've written. What do you think? Am I headed in the right direction? You gave me some really good advice early on, and I was trying to move forward in writing my first book. So I think that's great advice. You say this about yourself, and that is that your writing often carries two underlying themes. The first one being that life, attitudes, and actions, or life mirrors attitudes and actions, and they shape the boomerang, the sort of effect that comes back at you. And then a positive outlook and generous action yields a rich life. Secondly, nobody gets out of this life alive. And so we should have fun muddling through it. But with this dual writing personality, it gives you the ability to, in one sense, punish wrongdoing, and then you can turn around and frolic through, a different scenario.
Right.
Is that always kind of your foundation when you're writing? Is that your approach to?
Yes, yes. I very much believe that we feed our lives, and my characters have to be fed. Many of them are fashioned after people I know. Many of them, like the dog, which is a fiction nonfiction, that one is one that feeds people, and I think makes them richer for the effort. And that's my goal in life, is to share and feed people so that they're stronger.
Well, let's jump into Dear Aunt Peggy, emails from Petey Pup.
Right.
And let's tell us, give us, what was around that book, the inspiration for that, and what it was about.
Well, I was working in the backyard one day and I heard a yelp, and my dogs were sleeping there in the flower bed, so I knew it wasn't mine. Went back to work and I heard the yelp again. So I went out to the front, and the boy next door was hitting this poor little bedraggled dog with a baseball bat. Now, it was one of those plastic bats, but nonetheless, he was hitting the dog.
Sure.
And I rarely raise my voice, but I can promise my voice was raised at that kid. And I brought Petey in, and he was so scrawny, and he was dirty, and he smelled terrible. So I thought I'd clean him up and find his home. And little did I know that Petey would eventually take over my computer. That is the only dog I've ever owned who had such an expressive personality. And he could worm his way into your heart with very little effort. I tried to get my sister to adopt him. I already had to. I didn't need another one. And she said, "Oh, thank you, but no, thank you. I'd rather be his aunt." And so it wasn't long until she would we chatted back and forth. And she said, "Well, how's Petey doing?" And I'd tell her what he stayed in trouble all the time. I would tell her what his last escapade was. And one day she asked that question, and I said, "Well, let's let Petey tell you." And so I sort of slipped into that persona and started sending her emails from Petey, telling her exactly what he did. That book has absolutely no lies in it. It has a lot of exaggerations, thanks. But everything that happened. And he would write emails to Peggy begging for sympathy because he got in trouble at home. Eventually, after 2 or 3 years, her daughter suggested that I collect these emails into a book. And that was how that book was born.
That I love that. Of course, personally, I knew the story, but I wanted you to share it. And but I love that story. And my grandson's almost old enough now that I think I can give that book to him, and
Right.
He'll be able to read along, and I have, of course, that book.
Right.
Tell me then about Amelia's Gift. Was that your second book? That was the second
That
book.
was the second one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Petey came out in 2013. Amelia came out in 15. That one was actually a NaNoWriMo challenge. I don't know if your readers are familiar with NaNoWriMo.
Some will be. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful tool to discipline yourself to get the story done. You have 30 days to get 50,000 words written, and that is a wonderful skeleton for a book. And I took that challenge in 2013, right after Petey's book was published. And I sat on that one for a while and then decided maybe it is a worthwhile story. And it's basically set in the 1950s, and it's about a 10-year-old girl, and it's very much patterned after my own life and upbringing. I was very close to my grandmother, and Amelia is close to hers. There was a theater in that little town. It did close, and we did have a campaign to save it. I let Amelia save that theater. I wasn't able to. Surprisingly, the year Amelia's Gift came out, many, many years later, a group had rescued that theater, and it's now a meeting place for weddings and conferences and school shows. But it's fiction, but it's very much based on life in a small Texas town.
And that your audience for that book would be?
Actually, that one is more focused for women my age who would like to look back and reminisce on a quieter, gentler time. And I wanted young girls today to realize that there was a time when you could spend time being neighborly. In that book, the girl is very close friends with a woman who's nearly 100 years old. And it shocks Amelia when she finds out that woman lived during the Civil War. And that is just profound for Amelia. The truth is, I knew that lady.
Yeah,
I didn't know that lady, and she was precious to me.
That's another great story. And then your most recent book is The Quick Reads.
Yeah.
It's a collection of short stories. Tell us about that.
Well, like I said, I've written over many, many years, and as I gained a little confidence, I submitted these stories to some journals, writers' journals, and they were accepted and published. And of course, as I got through, my skills grew. I edited them a little bit and revised them and wrote new ones. But every book, every story in there has been published except one. And the book that is based on that story has not been written yet. But it's like the prologue to that book, and that's Elias.
Yeah.
It's a young man who's he's living in the period just right at the end of the Comanche Wars in Texas, and he dies. And his death is the foundation of a book I'm writing. Now, also, The Dawn of the Angry Guns is in there. That's the one that won the Texas Authors Award in 2016 for historical fiction. And as far as I know, and as far as any of the other Alamo enthusiasts know, that's the only story that's ever been written about a Mexican conscript, the plain old foot soldier that was recruited as Santa Anna marched through Mexico.
Yeah, great.
His view of that battle.
Yeah, that's great. So we're there then. You're touching on it. So tell us about the books that you got in the hopper. What are you working on?
Well, the one that I'm working on right now, the working title is The Mystery at Muddy Puddle Farm. I love catchy names for my locations, if I can think one up. This one has a little bit of everything in it. It was a huge stretch for me. It was a NaNoWriMo challenge in 2016. And I didn't quite make the challenge, got 48,000 words instead of 50, but I have the skeleton of the story. And it's basically a young woman has inherited a farm that's been abandoned for years. There's a neighbor who creates some problems for her. This book actually contains date rape. And I had to do a lot of research on that, but this is not the nicest neighbor you ever knew. It contains arson, murder, mass graves, hidden gold. It even has some ghosts in it. I mean, I just covered the spectrum in this one, and I really like it. It's fun.
Yeah.
The,
Go ahead.
the second one is the story about Elias, and it happens in the modern day times, and they find the skeleton on a ranch down in central Texas. And the story revolves around that skeleton, who he is, and how they find out. The third one is based on my granddaddy's life. Granddaddy fled Tennessee in about 1905 because he thought he'd killed a man. And he spent his entire life in Texas believing he was a murderer. When his mother died, he slipped back to Tennessee in the dark of night. He rode a bus in, got in there at night, moved to the graveyard, spent time in the graveyard, and just at dawn, he came back into town to board the bus to come home. And as it pulls out of the station, there is the man he thought he'd killed walking down the street. So it is, and it is based on his life. Now, I don't know a whole lot about his life before then, but I know how cantankerous he was. So we're going to have a lot of events happening all the way to Texas.
How do you to begin the process? So you say, okay, I've got 3 books going. What inspires you? I mean, what's the motivation? What's the click that says, okay, this is a book and I'm going to write this story? What moves you?
Pretty much anything. I was helping a man with his nonfiction Alamo book. He's writing on the artillery that was used in the Alamo in the 1836 battle. And I thought, we have diaries and we have stories from the Texans. We have a diary from De La Peña, who was an officer in that war. But what about the soldier? What about the guy that he pulled out of the fields in St. Louis Potosi and said, we're going. You're going with me. And you're going to march 500 miles to Texas. And you're going to fight in a battle. And of course, he's familiar with farming. He's not a soldier, but he was conscripted. And how he struggles with the battle and with his response to the battle. And I wondered about that because I know that our military come home from these battles in Afghanistan and they are struggling with what they have seen and done. They're struggling with PTSD. And I can't imagine any war ever in history not having that issue. And I wanted this soldier to struggle with that as well. And I guess he did a good job of it. It won the award.
Oh, yeah, great. I remember when I first met you. It was my first time to attend the Writers Guild of Texas there in Richardson.
Right.
And you were speaking that night, and we chatted for just a minute or so afterwards. And I went home that night and I said to my wife, I said, I met this Texas gal and I just want to get to know her. And so you do public speaking.
Yes.
And you're certainly a storyteller. What moves you or inspires you, or how do you approach public speaking? I mean, I'm sure from venue to venue, it could change based on some specific subject that they've asked you to talk on. But
that's right.
If you've been invited to just speak, how do you approach that? How do you engage with the audience and decide on the stories to tell them?
Right. Well, I think the very first thing is to know who your audience is. You could talk to a bunch of red hat ladies when you'd use one subject. You talk to a bunch of writers, you'd use another subject. Although you can use the same tools in both. I really, I did do Toastmasters for a while, so I learned not to say ah and oh and ooh, but most of the time I can kind of spiel out something. You'd be surprised how much is hidden in there that just needs to come out.
Oh yeah. Well, the stories, you know, I love storytelling. I love the art of storytelling. Um, and so for me, when I'm speaking, I know that I always have this point that I want to arrive at. And
Right,
you sort of begin, and then you've got a number of details to fill in, and you know, to try to hold your audience's attention. But generally, there is a message that I want to convey, and you know, I want people to feel uplifted. I want them to feel inspired. I want them to feel empowered. I want them to feel hopeful.
right,
And you know, I think these things are sort of at a deficit right now, and so we're trying to, you know, make positive contributions to people's
absolutely.
everyday lives. And
Mhm.
so I think there's a lot to be said about, you know, storytelling, and
Right,
you know, not only from our experiences, but I think we all have a story to tell, and I think our stories are important. I think they matter, and I think conveying that to other people, that their stories matter,
right.
yeah, I think is a way to connect and build, you know, positive interactions, and hopefully lift people to a, you know, to a higher place.
Right. Well, you know, I think the one thing when you come to face with a person, like you and I did that day on the stools at McDonald's, I
Yeah,
believe it was.
right. Yeah,
We spent nearly 2 hours there and shared ideas. And the bottom line came about is that we've had similar experiences and we've had different experiences, and we've both learned lessons we can share from those.
right. Yeah, no, it's very, and that's what I miss about, you know, it was the enjoyment of interacting together at the workshop, but for me, it was really about, you know, sitting at the restaurant after the workshop, and
Right.
you know, having a cup of coffee and a bite to eat, and just talking about life, and
Absolutely.
you know, the things that I appreciate about you. Um, you know, first off is your wisdom, which you have collected by living your life over the years, um, and your attitude, your outlook, but your sense of humor too. I mean, it's, you know, and so, and that comes out in your speaking, and it comes out in your writing.
Hmm.
But I think this younger generation is missing um, the benefits of listening to people who aren't so young.
That's right.
And they're shoving, you know, there's this, they've been indoctrinated in a certain way of thinking, and I think there's something that they're missing by not making a connection to the older generation to understand them a little bit better.
Well, I think that a lot of it has to do with our digital age. They
That
are
too.
better connected with their laptop, their computer, and their cell phone than these young people are, even with each other. You
Yeah.
can go to any restaurant and see a couple sitting at a table texting to one another. We're going, you know, as people evolve, they develop the parts of their body they use most. So we're going to have people with 6 foot thumbs.
Yeah, it's the science is definitely available now, and
Yeah,
we can all understand that while we've become connected to the larger world, our intimate world has become barren, and
that's
these
right.
relationships are not full, they're not rich,
Hmm.
um, and so yeah, you know, and it is an epidemic. I mean, you go anywhere and you see people sitting around in groups, and they're all on their phones. It's like we met to be together, but they're really not, not together. So yeah, it's definitely a real thing.
Absolutely.
Um, you mentioned when we first started that your goal is you just want to make a contribution to people's lives. When you think about your legacy, not that that's coming anytime soon, but we're all going to face that. When you think about that, what do you want your legacy to be? You're writing. You're going to have several more books out. What do you want your legacy to be?
Actually, I would love to be remembered for just one thing. She was happy.
Well, that's a goal.
I am happy with most everything I do. If I get unhappy, do you know who I'm usually unhappy with? Me.
Self, yeah.
Yeah, me. I don't drive myself anymore. I allow myself to hear the birds. I allow myself to overhear conversations. I allow myself to cuddle with my dog. I don't care if my house is dirty anymore. The dirt will be there when I'm not. Somebody else can clean it, but my little dog won't be with me forever, and I want to enjoy him. There's some lovely, lovely people here in this development, and we do a lot of things together. One of the ladies here is going blind. So I've taken each of my books. She was just dancing until Quick Reads came out. She couldn't wait, but I've read Petey to her. I've read Amelia to her. And now I'm reading the Quick Reads to her. And I've told her about this Muddy Puddle book, and she'll call me about every 2 weeks. Have you finished that one yet? She's eager to hear it. And that's a life that I know I've touched. And there's 2 little girls who come down. They want to walk my dog every time they come to visit their grandmother. So we go walk the dog together and we chat. And they usually go away with a little tidbit that they can remember. I never know when it is or what it'll be.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, I remember when you moved up to where you're living now, and I'm so happy that's turned out to be a
Right.
a good experience for you. Um,
Well, our experiences are what we make them, Rick.
that's true.
I
That's so
chose to
true.
be happy, so I'm going to be.
I have a friend. His name's Kevin Knebel,
Uh-huh.
and he has one prayer that he prays every day, and that is, God, remove anything that prevents me from seeing how blessed that I really am.
True.
That's his prayer, and
Yeah.
you can't make it any any more simple than that. And he's got one of the happiest vibes of anybody I've ever known. He's just
Right.
he's happy, and it's a choice. And so yeah, we all face stuff, but it's how we face it.
Absolutely.
What we're going to deal with. Well, Pat, it's been great being with you. I just want to ask you though.
Okay.
Um, what do you read for pleasure? What type of genre do you read for pleasure?
Well, I read Janet Ivanovich's Stephanie Plum series, for example. It's a little bit of a mystery. It's a little bit of a challenge for her, but she is funny. There's a wonderful thread of humor written into her books, and I love them. Before Irma Bombeck died, I loved her humor. And I think that no matter how dramatic the issue becomes, you can write something that the reader can smile about.
Yeah.
So I do read those lighter books.
What's your favorite book of all time that you read?
Favorite book of all time? Well, I'm going to have to surprise you there. My mom made me start Gone with the Wind when I was 14. And I read the first chapter. I said, Mom, this is so boring. I don't want to read this. She said, just hang in there, one more chapter. And the next day she couldn't find me because I was back in my bedroom reading Gone with the Wind. And I've read it 4 or 5 times. And that is one of the most powerful stories that I've ever read. There's a little bit of humor in it here and there. I love the way that Rhett Butler reacted in many of the ways. But that is one of the most powerful, well-written, well-rounded books that I've ever read.
Yeah, that's great. I've never read Gone with the Wind. I've thought about it several times. So maybe this is maybe you're extending an invitation to actually to read that.
I would read the book. I wouldn't watch the movie. The movie disappointed me because I'd read the book first.
Yeah, I think that happens a lot.
Yeah.
Movies are different, you know, than the book. Pat, it's been great to be with you. Thanks for taking the time, you know, letting the audience get to know you a little bit better. I want them to be able to connect with you. So the best way to connect with Pat is at www.pathaddock.com. That's www.pathaddock.com. Thanks for joining us today. As always, we appreciate you taking the time to watch our show. And remember, no matter what's going on in your life, just sprinkle a little love on it. I'm Rick Amitin, and I'll see you next time.